All right. Good afternoon. Let's get started. So I know this is the end of the week. People are probably a little bit worn out. We've had some fun snow coming down last night. So I'm glad y'all were able to make it here today. So I also know this is a midterm exam, essay time year, and a lot of you are probably pretty busy. So I want to make today a little bit more low-key and relaxed. We'll probably end a little bit early today, but I do want to pick up on some of our threads surrounding group membership and participation and get us thinking about some of these last ideas before we continue to move forward in the class. So before we do, I wanted to bring to your attention just some information regarding courses and preparing for the spring. So as you all probably noticed and saw, there is the opportunity to register for spring courses. It's now available. So for most of you, you should now be able to register for classes in the spring. I recommend that you register for spring courses just as soon as possible, since classes tend to fill up, and getting the requirements that you need for graduation and for your major is super important. So just get in touch with your advisor, know that that is available and that you can start planning out and thinking through your schedule. If you decide you want to put up with me more, I'm teaching a few different courses. So this spring, I'm teaching communication theory, both face-to-face and online. That course is a great way to think about sort of a crash course in communication. So if you're a major or thinking about being a comm major, it's definitely an important one to look into. The other course that I've mentioned a couple times through email and a little bit in class, but I wanted to talk about a little bit more, is Communicating Health and Science. So this is a new course that I'm teaching in the spring. It's Monday, Wednesday from 2 to 3:50. It is a 300 level course. So if you're looking for upper division course credit, it's a great way to fill that in. It also fulfills the general education, social science, SSI credit. So if you're looking to get that filled as part of your general ed requirements, you're welcome to do that. Big thing that I do is health communication, right? So I've published in journals including health communication, science communication. I'm really interested in relationships between health and disability. And so it's a big area of expertise to me and something I've been excited to bring to EOU. So if this is a course that's interesting to you, or you're thinking about just getting that requirement, this is a course that we'll be using to look into issues surrounding health and science. So for instance, doing things like health campaigns, how we convey, use information in health and science. My hope is also that we can get working on things like health campaigns for the spring symposium. So we'll see. It's a course that I think is really useful if you're at all interested in careers in health and science, or you just find it interesting. So just know that that course is available and is on the list of courses to register for the spring. So I just wanted to let you know that that course is an option should you choose to take that, especially if you're thinking about another comm course or a course to fill those gen ed outcomes. So I just wanted to put that on your radar as we get started for today. So last class, we spent some time talking about power and the ways that leadership and roles can impact our small group communication. So last class, we did an activity where I was asking you to plan a birthday party. And one thing that kind of stood out were the different ways that people work together to think about how to host that party, how to brainstorm and come up with a variety of ideas. So we talked about some of those skills and ways of using things like brainstorming as we participate in these kinds of groups. I also want to bring to your attention just as another reminder that your next assignment in the class, the small group assessment, is due on the 13th. That's a week from Sunday. We're going to be doing another scenario activity in class. There'll be another opportunity if you need to drop in something else in thinking through your assignment to be able to do so. So again, I'm asking you to think about, to apply, to use those group activities that we've been doing throughout the quarter and to reflect on the ways that that connects to things that you've learned so far about group membership and communication. Last class, we talked about this idea of the Tannenbaum-Schmidt continuum. It's going to be useful for us today as well when we're looking at different ways that people can participate and be involved in groups. I used the example last class of thinking about if you're on an extracurricular team and you find out somebody's broken the rules and is secretly coached or supported an opposing team. You can either be fully autocratic, right, and just announce that this person has been removed from the team, or you can be fully participative and not make the decision yourself as a manager, but instead allow members of the team to work together on a solution or somewhere in between. So depending on the context and situation, you might decide on what level of power you as a leader or facilitator have. Again, there's pros and cons to those different approaches. We'll talk a little bit more about that today when we talk about what makes for facilitating and participating in groups effectively. Last class, we also talked about the idea of brainstorming. It's kind of a silly but an interesting example, right? The idea that ostriches don't have very many eggs, but they're very big and they make a lot of time to take care of them. You have a few ideas, you really pay attention and build those ideas and present them to the group, or you're like sea urchins where you have a ton of ideas. A lot of them don't stick. You throw a bunch at the wall, not a lot sticks, but you do end up coming up with some interesting possibilities. Again, brainstorming is something that works really well as you're planning out, something like birthday party, figuring out how to solve a complex problem, figuring out how to divide up a task or prepare for some type of event. Those things are always really good opportunities for brainstorming and putting a bunch of those complex thoughts into action. We also talked about some of the ways that brainstorming groups can be more difficult. The idea that when somebody's talking, you have less of an interest in participating, or you might choose to censor or not bring your ideas to the table. We match the mood and energy of people around us. So if others are not as engaged, we might not be as engaged ourselves. And then the idea that we oftentimes think we're accomplishing a lot more in a group than we actually are. So for today, I want to spend some time talking about small group facilitation. We'll take a super long time to talk about those things. And then I'll ask us to address and do a scenario that's focused on facilitating a group from the perspective of being a leader or manager within that group. I also wanted to make a quick mention about the small group reflection. So I'll have your feedback and overall grade on that assignment in by the end of the day today. But I did want to mention some general observations that I had about this assignment, things that I noticed that went well and things to continue to work on. So in my first round, working through these, some things that I noticed that you can continue to work on are with citations, right? Making sure you've got that full APA citation and including that in text, though a lot of people did that really well. Paragraph length is another thing that I encourage you to keep working on. A good rule of thumb is that if a paragraph is longer than half a page double spaced, break it into another one. There's a good chance you're trailing off into a new idea. And then continue to work on things like structure. For instance, using commas to break up clauses in a sentence, using really clear topic sentences, and so on. I did really like the ways that you all brought in some good and pretty specific examples from your group. You all chose some good groups that you've been a part of or you're currently a part of. And I like the way that you would say, hey, here is how I'm a team player. Here are specific instances from this group that show this in action. So I really like your focus on application. So again, it's a short writing assignment, but a good way to get our feet wet and just start thinking about some of these ideas. So look forward to more details there. And of course, if you have questions about the score that you end up receiving, do let me know. So for today, I want to talk about this idea of group facilitation. That is, it's not only we're part of a group and we're working together, but we can consider what it means to occupy this type of role as a facilitator or person that's creating a group discussion. So a facilitator, right, is something that we hear used as a term a lot. If you've taken a class like conflict management, you might be familiar with this idea. Facilitation is not something that I think gets talked about a whole lot, right? A group facilitator, if you think about facilitating, right, it's creating a space for discussion and engagement and learning among people in a group. That is, a group facilitator is generally not somebody that says, it's my way or the highway, here's what we need to do, we're doing it the way I want you to do it. A group facilitator, though, is also not somebody that's completely passive, that's a body in the room that's just taking notes. Rather, a group facilitator is kind of like somebody that's steering the ship or guiding the discussion. So as a facilitator in a group, you're oftentimes finding yourself in a really complex role because you're trying to make things easier and more streamlined and helpful for people to work together in a group and to achieve the growth or goals that members of the group are trying to do, right? A good example of this is something like a mediator, right? So if you're a third party, for instance, I know Ryan isn't here today, but if you have folks that, for instance, are an RA and you have a bunch of people who are in disagreement about noise, things going on in the dorm rooms and so on, right? As a facilitator, you're not going to take a side necessarily, but you are going to try to listen and hear out the concerns that people are having in the dorms, right? In an effort to make sure that people's voices are heard and that they're able to resolve the issue. In the same way, somebody like a counselor, like a group or couples counselor is another example of somebody that takes on this facilitative role, where they're not necessarily making a judgment, but instead helping the group to move on. So oftentimes somebody that is a team leader or manager, somebody like a coach or a captain or supervisor, is somebody that's in charge of trying to create a smooth and streamlined process for a group to work together and understand each other in a clear way. So group facilitation is important because if a group is not done well and it goes poorly, right, you risk having greater tensions and the group doesn't get the things that they need done. In fact, assigning somebody in a facilitator role, if you ever do something like a group project for a class, can be a really good way to ensure that everybody is able to effectively work together to accomplish the issue, because it allows that kind of neutral space. So in order to create a good and effective facilitation of whatever issue or topic your group is trying to work through, there's a lot of different things that we can do. One of the biggest ones is if you are a leader or facilitator or manager in a group, chances are you're going to be at least one point in your life, if you haven't been already. Knowing the group members is a really important place to start. And by knowing, I don't just mean knowing that person's name, although that's definitely a good starting point. Using things like icebreakers is a really good way to get to know people and help people feel more comfortable. In fact, oftentimes you can use that as a joke or reference back to that later. We did, when I was part of a group, we did an activity, right, where we would say our first name and then we'd say a food or vegetable or drink or whatever, right, that we enjoyed that had the same letter as our first name. So I was Ben and I liked blueberries. And so everybody was like, oh, Ben, blueberries. What do you have to say? So sometimes, right, getting to know group members means that you develop like a vocabulary and use of humor and so on. You can also think about knowing the group members as knowing where they stand and how they feel about a particular issue. If you're trying to put together some type of event, again, like a symposium or some type of group or gathering, right? And you know there's somebody in your group that's just awesome when it comes to managing technology. It would be great at facilitating like the Zoom part of a hybrid event. That's definitely a way that your knowledge of the group member lets you split those people up and lets people specialize in areas that work for them. You can even consider having people do something like Belbin self-perception inventory as a way of helping them to think about the types of roles or tasks that they might be best at. Another key idea here is thinking about human psychology, right? So this isn't a psychology course, but we actually have talked a lot about how human behavior and psychology impacts small groups. When we think about psychology, we think about it in a few different ways, right? That it involves learned behaviors, things that we've developed and facilitated over time. For instance, maybe you know that when you're in a group and somebody is asking for a volunteer or asking for somebody to say something, that if you don't give them eye contact, they're not going to call on you, right? That's an example of how we use learned behaviors to get the outcomes we want. Thinking processes. So it could be the use of things like heuristic devices, using acronyms or ways to remember and retain information, but also thinking about the ways that our own memory can be limited. We can use notes and listen to recall and remember things for later. Sometimes it's unconscious, right? Sometimes, especially based on things like our physiological or psychological states, we're in a bad mood, then maybe we're not going to listen or pay attention as closely. And then biological processes. One thing you can do to facilitate a good group, one thing you all mentioned earlier in class when we did the interviewing example, right, is to do things like snacks or breaks or having access to things like water and so on. It's a lot harder to feel like you can participate and be involved in the group. You're worried about when the heck you can go to the bathroom, right? So you can definitely think about how participating and creating a good group involves ensuring that you're thinking and looking out for how people in your group are behaving and taking in information. Another issue, right, is thinking about disruptions or problems, especially if you're working, for instance, with the younger group of people. Disruptions, people blurting out things or, throwing a fit or just not being the way they need to be can be a problem, but we see this in other professional contexts too, right? There's bad behavior and disruptions that happen everywhere. So you could think in advance about the strategy that you use here. Common strategy, right? You might remember from like middle school, it's like calling on somebody's name if they're causing a disruption. But there are also ways to constructively bring people in to the discussion as well. To ask somebody to share their thoughts or ideas if they're being disruptive in a group. And also create standards for how group members should behave, like a written agreement. And again, when you're in a group, right, there's a good chance that you are getting off task sometimes, going on tangents, rambling, not focusing as much on the specific issue or topic. So as a facilitator or leader of a group, you have a responsibility to circle people back and bring them back into the discussion. Even if it seems like people are having a good conversation, if it gets too far off track, right, people will get frustrated that they're not finishing the things that they need to do in that period of time. So a big goal here in facilitating the group is to make that group and its participation feel worth it and to feel like you deserve or need to be there for a reason. I wanted to share a short video that I think has some additional good applications for what it means to be a good group facilitator. So this video looks at, in sort of a business context, what good group meetings and group facilitation look like. And as you're watching, I want you to pay attention to some of the tips and practices that are discussed in creating a good environment as a group facilitator. What does it mean to be a good facilitator, and what does a good facilitator do as a practice? So I'll share you that, and then we'll talk about that a little bit together.
Facilitation is about making it easier for groups of people to understand each other's point of view. So sit back for a few moments and put aside responding to those urgent emails as we share some of the good stuff with you and highlight the poor practices you ought to be on the lookout for. And may your business meetings be forever improved. The best facilitators carefully assess the needs of those in the meeting. They treat participants equally and work hard to stay neutral in all discussions. A good facilitator knows how to use a wide range of process tools, but they'll have to be a story for another day, as there are just too many to review in this short video. Getting back to best practices, a good facilitator creates an open and trusting atmosphere and helps participants understand why they're there. They listen intently in order to fully understand what's being said, and when speaking themselves, use simple, direct language. Good facilitators work to make participants the center of attention and take notes that accurately reflect what participants mean. Contrast this with some traits of bad facilitators. These are the things to watch out for and avoid in your own business meetings whenever possible. Poor facilitators want to be the center of attention. They don't really bother checking in with the participants and seeing whether they have any concerns. They often fail to listen and end up losing track of key ideas. They also tend to be overly passive on process and let things amble on. Ever been in a meeting like that? Why, you end up asking yourself, just what is going on here? Why are we doing all this? You raise your concern and the facilitator puts you down? Yep, right there is another trait of bad facilitators. They put people down and get defensive, often about some relatively minor process issue. Meetings run by these facilitators often end up being dominated by the team leader or some other strong voice. Poor facilitators take poor notes. Poor notes lead to poor decisions, often based on what wasn't said. In fact, poor facilitators can be so preoccupied with making their poor notes that they fail to check how the meeting is going and seem to be totally oblivious as to when to take a break. The very worst facilitators tend to push ahead with an irrelevant agenda, having no alternative approaches to offer, and criminally let discussions ramble on and on and on and on without proper closure, which is, of course, a complete waste of everybody's time. So don't go there. Good facilitators are willing to champion ideas they don't personally favor and find ways of concluding meetings on an optimistic note. In their concluding remarks, good facilitators make sure their meetings end with clear steps for the next meeting, ensuring that everybody is up to speed and understands what they have to do. So there you have it, a quick resume of the best and worst facilitator practices. Active presence.
Okay, so I think there's a few good things that this video covers that kind of build on some of the points we've raised so far regarding facilitation. One of the big things, right, that the video emphasizes in groups is that facilitation is not about you, right? When you're a facilitator and you have that type of role, you're somebody that has some level of power over the group. Again, you could be a supervisor, a manager, a team captain or leader, and so on. And as a result of occupying that position of power, people are going to be more likely to want to listen to you and hear what you have to say. As a result of that, right, they're going to be more likely to defer to you and to not share their own perspective if you already shown your cards and where you stand as a team leader, right? We've mentioned this a little bit in class, but a big problem in small group communication and also a problem in things like conflict management, right, is the idea of groupthink. Again, the idea that somebody as a leader or manager of a group essentially stifles discussion or the ability of people to openly express their thoughts. If, for instance, your team captain or boss really strongly thinks that you should have this student kicked off the team for cheating and supporting another team, right? And you feel differently, you feel like, well, maybe they should just be suspended for a while. You're probably not going to want to share your perspective as much for a lot of reasons. One of the biggest ones being that your supervisor has power over you and is probably, you're worried that they might punish you for expressing a view that goes against what they have to say. You don't want to cross somebody that has a level of power or authority, right? So as a facilitator, one of your challenges is not to openly share your own perspective early on, but instead to allow your perspective and idea to emerge over time, oftentimes in a way that responds to what other people in the group have mentioned. It sounds like most people think that it's a good idea for us to suspend this person. I was originally thinking about taking them off, but I really think you have some good ideas about why we should do a suspension instead, right? Showing that your perspective has emerged by listening and paying attention to people in your group, it's a great way to communicate. Another thing to think about is that, right, groupthink can lead to disastrous outcomes. So those of you that have taken, again, courses like conflict management, right, or courses in political science might be familiar with some of the most disastrous examples of groupthink gone wrong. For instance, if you've ever heard of Bay of Pigs invasion under the John F. Kennedy administration, right? This was a pretty massive foreign policy failure that was seen as an embarrassment by the United States. It cost lives, it cost a ton of money, it cost a lot of international credibility. That mission went forward despite the fact that there were military leaders and people close to the president who did not think that the plan was a good idea. But because they saw the president and some of his closest supporters, such as the chief of staff, being supportive of this plan, they chose to sign on and not to express their reservations, right? regardless of where you kind of stand politically or view the topic, I think it's fair to say that the withdrawal from Afghanistan did not go the best that it could have gone, right? And I think groupthink can also help to explain some of the reasons that that event, where there were perspectives by people, including military leaders, that might not have been looked at or thought of as full. Self-censorship happens, and self-censorship can have pretty serious consequences if there's not a setting where people can openly express their ideas or points of view. One way that's another really helpful strategy for a group facilitator to create a kind of environment where all of these ideas are heard and brought into perspective is to have people choose to play or openly share opposing views. There's a lot of situations where being the devil's advocate can be really annoying or unwanted or unnecessary. But if your group is working together on a solution to a problem and you have somebody who comes in and argues the opposing view, it can really help to either cement your perspective or to explore a different option, right? It lets group members work together more effectively because you've really thought everything out. And then another key idea here is this idea of co-liberation that comes through working together to effectively facilitate and manage a group. This is the idea that both you and other members of the group are working together in this open and very free way of communicating. If, for instance, you're not really engaging, but other people are, you have this issue of conformity, where you're just kind of signing on to or agreeing with what other people have to say without bringing something to the table of your own. On the other extreme, you risk alienating if you're the only one talking or dominating the space, and you're not allowing other people to contribute and to be a part of that discussion. So the challenge here is finding that balance where you're able to participate and share ideas, but you also are listening and contributing to the overall discussion too. And being a good facilitator means managing some of the ways that somebody might dominate or occupy a larger role in the space. So co-liberation is an important step we can take to counteract some of those concerns. So I have a longer prompt for you to think about and to spend a good amount of time with on your own. And this prompt relates to the ways that we think about group facilitation and membership. So in this scenario, you are the coach of a high school soccer team. It's okay if you haven't played soccer or you're not into sports, you don't need to know the details of soccer as you're thinking through this. But you're on this high school team, you're working with high school age students. Your goal is to facilitate and create a positive environment among the students on that team where they can learn and do well. You might do things like do regular practices, do some like team meetings, and other examples of like one-on-one coaching, traveling, going to games, that sort of thing. So what I want you to think about and to take some time to write on your own is what you would need to do in order to facilitate this small group, in order to facilitate this high school soccer team. If you were a team leader of this group or coach, what would you do to facilitate this group? Secondarily, I want you to think about disruptions. It's going to be a bunch of high schoolers, right? And you know that there are going to be some people that are going to be a little bit like class clowns or a little bit obnoxious in the group. So how would you manage or deal with disruptions as part of this team? And then lastly, I want you to think back to the Tannenbaum-Schmidt continuum and this range between autocratic, democratic, and participatory decision-making. Which of those three would you lean more toward and why if you're thinking about this group? So take some time, work on this prompt on your own. You will be sharing and talking about it with others in a bit, but I do want you just to take some time to share your own thoughts independently. Give you another 3 minutes or so on this. Go ahead and wrap up current thought or idea you're working on. So what I want you to do now is, since we have a smaller group here face-to-face, we have 7 people here, and then we have, it looks to be about 5 people on Zoom. We'll do like a face-to-face team and a Zoom team. What I want you to do is to go around and have each person share how you chose to address this problem. So how you chose to facilitate this high school soccer team. And then once everybody has shared within your group, I'd like you to talk a little bit about what you noticed as similar or different in the way that your group members talked about facilitating the group. And then see if, based on listening and hearing members of your group, if your opinion has changed at all on how you would manage this team. So we'll have all of you all here face to face, chat together, and then I'll create a breakout room for Zoom folks so that you all can talk together as well. All right, go ahead and take some time to share.
How's it going again, guys? All right. So what would you need in order to efficiency? Alright, so if I was the coach, to be efficient and not make sure like at home, I said that to build chemistry and whatnot, that'd be like daily practices, as well as team dinners before games. I think that's a good way to like players to like talk with like people, so you know, talk with one another off the field is very important as well. I also said that the bridge between like players and coaches is also really important because if you have a coach that you don't like or hate, you're just gonna bring around the whole team. So me as the coach, I said I'd have like meetings and whatnot with members of the team individually to discuss any concerns or anything. Too much, but I got as far as the first prompt.
I guess for myself, I would say, yeah, trying to get to know each of the players, so I know what their needs need to be and what they can do for the team. One thing is like saying up how we communicate on the field, which is important to see who can we rely on for different tasks. One other thing was to also formations, who's what me place was, so they can see what they can do there, maybe switch it up to see who gets to what places. But yeah, that would be my way, is trying to personally see how my team is doing and then figuring out different places that they can work well within that team. For disruptions, they would have to, of course, do drills, extra drills, or sit-ups, push-ups, that way fit, I would say, but it would force them to focus more on what the team's doing rather than keeping in the case of, what was the third one?
It says
Oh, yes. So I chose autocratic, mostly, but also explain why. Well, I chose autocratic just to say, because if you're a coach, you have to make decisions on where you're going to be playing, who you're playing against, and stuff like that. But I also chose a sort of democratic side, saying like, oh, where do you guys want to go celebrating these different wins that we've had, or tasks that you want to do, like for a fun day of practice, what you guys want to do. But for more important things, it's more autocratic and explain why, and then democratic.
Okay, so for mine, I said, first question, to facilitate a positive environment, I think you just, like, you have to get to know them, you have to understand how everyone functions, like individually, but also as a team, because everyone's not always gonna get along. But I also said just like having dinners and just getting to know everyone on the team. And then for disruptions, I said like physical punishments as a team, like running, or like he said, drills, because I feel like you have to do that once, you're probably not going to mess up again. It's just how that works, I feel like. But then also having the team like maybe come together after a bit of the drill, like make them run a bit, and then like let them brainstorm on what they did wrong. Then lastly, for the last question, I also said autocratic just because the decision making, a lot of it should be up to the coach, but also it could be participatory because the athletes can kind of have a say on a lot of their things.
Yeah, I kind of have the same thing. I think I would just, as a coach, I would set up my practices in time slots and keep it organized, and always have a stopwatch on them. And then if I had to punish them, yeah, same thing, just make them run. And I just think the coach should run it. So it's at a high school level. I don't think it should be a Democrat thing at all, or not Democratic. Okay, yeah. Okay, good. And so I said autocratic because it should just be one leader. I think you can have a conversation with your team if you want, but I think a coach has the job of putting people in the right positions.
Yeah, for the first topic, very similar things what everyone else said. Maybe have some like one-on-one meetings, so you get to know the players a lot better, like yourself as a coach, so like something goes wrong, you can like better understand what's going on with the players. As well as like team dinners and like team meetings, like have some more formal stuff. There's like a meeting, it's more informal, like going out with the team and have everyone there, just kind of more chill, relax, like have fun. But the managed disruptions, kind of similar stuff to everyone else, but like for more like serious stuff, maybe like two players like fighting or something, maybe like pull them aside, see like what like the issue is and what's going on, and then like help them like resolve the issue, what's going on, and then you can punish them after if you feel the need to, and you can run so they don't do it again. And then I also chose autocratic with a little bit more of the democratic side, because like with all they said, as the coach, you're kind of the one making decisions and being the final say, but it's also good to see what the players want to do, like what their interest is, if they have any ideas that like might influence what you want to do. But as the coach, you're like the head and you make the final decisions, especially at high school level.
And then I said, kind of the same as you, one-on-ones to get to know the person, so you know who you're working with, and then just team groups like everyone else said. And then for punishment, I said a 3-strike type system where you keep messing up, you're off the team basically. And then I said mixed autocratic and democratic, where I'm gonna, as the leader, autocratically setting up stuff, but as the democratic, picking where we go, and then picking some days like you want to do your own training or something like that.
What I would do, what I would need to do in order to effectively facilitate the small group would be to create a group chat with the team or like do the little team app, and it'll help with getting to know each other, and also have team dinners like every Tuesday or on a Saturday where we'd all do icebreakers, and I would and if a person was causing trouble, I'd first pull them aside to figure out what is going on and see if they're having a bad day or if they're just not doing well. And if they keep it up, I'll make them run. And if they keep on doing it, then I'll have a talk with the parents. And if it keeps up, kick them out. And yeah.
Seems like a lot of similarities among you all in terms of how you would manage or work together in the group. Were there any differences that stood out to you all in how you would facilitate? Yeah, it is. It is pretty similar. I mean, I think it's interesting. There does seem to be a spectrum of like completely autocratic to maybe a little bit of democratic, like some input from students. So that's definitely something to play around with. I would imagine opinions probably didn't change a whole lot either. So it's kind of interesting to see overall, the perspectives were pretty similar. A couple things that stood out to me as you all were sharing your ideas, right? Is obviously the role of power in a facilitating group when you have like a group of high schoolers and you're in position as a college student. I really like the point that was brought up that like, if you're a coach, right, your goal is to fit or slot the students the way that, you're in that leadership role. You have to sort of make those executive decisions. So that's something to think about, right, is that things such as age, level of experience, level of maturity, all of those things are going to play a really big role in figuring out, where you draw the line in participation and engagement. We want to have an open setting where people can talk freely about issues, but we also know you do have to sometimes draw lines, do things like that. My other class is joking about how, their response if somebody is misbehaving is, 50 laps, and similarly kind of doing things like drills as a way to encourage people to participate. So that's definitely an option, you can think about as well. Some of the more disciplinary measures of working together and facilitating a group. So I really like the ideas you all brought here. Again, you can facilitate a group, but also think about how, if you're in a position where you do need to take on leadership and some level of authority, that's going to be a pretty different way of managing the group versus like a group of peers in something like class working on a group project. So thinking about power in that context, I think is important. So, wanted to wrap up, get out maybe a couple minutes early. I wanted to talk and we had a chance to talk today about group facilitation that gets people involved in working together. It creates a setting for people to be involved in a group, that it involves collaboration, sharing ideas in an open and free way. But also, as you all brought up in the group activity, there are also situations where this executive drawing the line, making a hard decision is sometimes necessary for the group to function effectively. So those are important things to think about when we're examining the roles of power and membership in groups. So next week, we're going to be transitioning into talking about group meetings, right? Why is this a meeting? Why is it not an email? That type of thing. So how to make good group meetings, how to create settings in which people work together and facilitate with one another well will be our topic for next week. So have a great weekend. Go ahead and pass forward or email me your prompt for today, and enjoy the snow. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon.